Welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at loops in Python. So in Python there are a few types of loops, but we're going to be looking at one in particular, and that's a for loop. And so for item in some list, you then get the item and you do something. And that's probably not extremely clear, so I think it'll be best just to have a look. So first I'm going to declare a list. I'm just going to call this list1 and set it equal to 1, 3, 5, 7, and then 9. And then I'm going to go for item in list1, print item, and then I'll run it. And we can see it's gone through the list, one item at a time, and printed the item, which is quite nice. It doesn't just have to be numbers, so list2 could be equal to item1, item2, item4, item3. We've changed this to list2. Then we expect this to go item1, item2, item4, item3. Can also, for example, reverse my list, and then we'll see that it'll go through the list in reverse order. And so one thing we could then do with this is we could create a sum function. So Python already has a built-in sum function, but I'm not going to rewrite it. I'll just find the sum of these items in list1. So I'll set the sum equal to 0, and then for item in list1, the sum will increase by the item. And then at the end I'll print the sum. And there we go, 25. I could also find the product by multiplying them all together. But what if I wanted to go through both items at the same time? So I'm going to add a fifth item so they've got the same length. And one thing you can do is so I'm going to print them both out. And obviously I haven't defined these yet. One thing you can do is you can zip them together. So zip list1 and list2, and then use commas. So item1 and item2. And there you can see it goes through both of them. And this zip object could have as many lists as we wanted, and we just add item3 and list3. But what if we wanted to, for example, have two lists of different lengths? So if I actually just delete item5 and then run this, we see that it hasn't gone all the way through the first list. So we might want an alternative way of doing it. And that's where this range function comes in. So you've got two ways of doing it. You've got range length. So if I open up the shell, then type in range, for example 10, it creates a range object. But if we turn that back into a list, then you see we get the numbers 0 to 9. So to be general, that's 0 to the length minus 1. So if we want to loop through list 2, for example, and list 1, we know that list 1's got 5 items, list 1's got 4. We can say for I, which is short for index, and it's conventional to use I, and then in range, and then we know that the length of list 1 is 5, so we can print list 1 I and list 2 I. And at the end, notice there's an error because we can't reference every value in list 2. But this function has other uses. So for example, if we want to define a factorial function, and if we say n, then we can just say for I in range n, and first we need an initial value, so we'll say product is equal to 1, because if we set it to 0 that wouldn't work, and then we multiply by I plus 1, and that's the same as saying product is equal to product times I plus 1, and you can create pretty much any operator beforehand, so I could have the power, the sum, the subtract, and so we could print out factorial 12. And we can see that because we haven't actually returned the value, it hasn't worked, so we'll actually return the product at the end. And then we get 12 factorial. And unless you know that, that's not a great value, so I'm going to pick a smaller value so that we can check that it's worked. And there we go. And 5 factorial is 120. You also might not want to use range with just the length. You might want to have a start, a stop, and a jump, and the jump is optional. And we can see that it goes start, stop plus jump, and it adds the jump each time, all the way up to the stop, but it doesn't always get to the stop. So if we go back into the terminal by typing Python, and we get list range 5, 9, we see we get 5, 6, 7, 8, so it's all the way up to 9 minus 1, and that's because automatically the step is set to 1. But if we did 5, 9, and then a step of 2, it should just print 5 and then 7. But you might wonder what happens if we say list range 5 and then 10 and then 2. It's going up to but not above the final value minus 1. So if we wanted to, but now we might want to use that to create something interesting. So we're going to create our N-agon. First we want to import modules. So I'm going to import turtle, and I'm also going to import math. And the reason I'm not just importing a list of functions is because one of the functions we're going to use in maths is exactly the same as another function in Python, in the sense it has the same name, but it does something very different. Then I'm going to define n, so I'll set n equal to 5, and I'll create a radius equal to 100, which is going to be massive, but I'll leave for now. And then for I in range, and then n, because we want to repeat it n times, and we're not going to actually use the variable I, but it's kind of standard to call it that. And the range means that we can create a loop that runs n times without really having to worry what's in it. We could create a list of zeros, but range is the best way really to do this. And we want to go forwards, and then the actual value I've worked out is sine of pi divided by n multiplied by the radius and then doubled. And then we want to turn right, and then 360 divided by, and then n. And it's kind of confusing that this is in radians, but then this is in degrees. And so we want to say tussle.radians. You might want to also say math.degrees, and then change this to pi. So it was pretty good, but I think there are a few things that we could possibly do to improve it. So the first thing is at the start, I think it would help to move up a bit. So if we go to 0 and then radius, which is just above where we want to start, and then we also want to turn right slightly. And if we're going to do this, we probably want to lift the pen up. and then put it back down. And then it's centered. So if we increase the radius to 300, you can see that it's no longer down here. We could also ask the user for an input. So we say is equal to input, how many sides should the shape have? And I'll put a new line character. And so we want it to have, let's say, 10 sides. And for some reason it's not working. And that's because it says unsupported operands for float and string. Because what it's done is it's taken our input and left it as a string. And so we want to change this to become an int. And we'll rerun it. Use the same number 10. And there is a 10-sided shape. We could also get this to be an input. Say that is equal to a float this time, input, and then what should the radius be? Print on a new line, run it, and let's say we want it to have 12 sides this time. I want the radius to be 350. And then we have a 12-sided shape. And obviously this doesn't have to be an integer, but generally if you typed in 350.5 pixels, you wouldn't really be able to tell the difference. So hopefully you've learned 4 loops where you can repeat stuff, loop through a list or any iterable object. You've learned range, which creates an iterable range object that looks like an arithmetic sequence. And we've drawn some cool shapes. So see you again, same time. Till then.